the craziest study I read about in sociology, the one that changed my life and kind of like freaked me out a bit. Now, I already knew this intuitively, but when I was able to see the actual documentation, it really was not fun. So, my final semester at UCLA, I had to do a research paper, and I decided to do my research paper on the marginalization of women of color. And I forgot which class this was for, actually. I think it was for social psychology. And it took a few weeks to do the research paper. Had to have, 5 to 8 peer-reviewed academic papers. I think this was in the American Sociological Review where I found this study, but there's so many. Could have been also the American, the journal that they have for psychology, the main one. Anyways, all right. But there was this study, I'm sure you could find it if you like, where they looked at the brains of people who were dealing with what are called outgroups, right? So an outgroup is basically if you're the main group, the majority, the main one that controls resources and power structures, etc. The outgroup would be the other group, the one that's not. So in this study, they looked at the fact that people of color tend to empathize and relate and see themselves as being much more similar to the people who are in the in group. And the people that are in the in group tend not to see the people of color that way at all. So it's quite disturbing because what it was basically showing was when they looked at brain scans and stuff like that were hooked up to people's brains, that the people that were in the in group were people who had very little empathy for the out group, or at least not in the same way. So there were a lot of studies that were done as well on medical students, where they showed a guy who was black get hurt. And he was crying out for help, and he was in a lot of pain, and they would show videos to these medical students. And what they found is the medical students, the parts of their brain for empathy, for emotion, for let's go out and help him, it didn't activate, and they actually saw it as it's not a big deal and it's not a threat or an issue. But then they showed someone who was in the in group, and he was harmed in a very subtle way. Though it would be like the equivalent of tripping and falling and not getting injured that bad. But then in the other one, it was life-threatening, right? And what they found is there was a sense of urgency and let's help him. But with the other person recognizing their emotions, their pain, their feelings, their struggle were turned off. And it gets even worse, right? So even with facial expressions, and you can look any of this stuff up, but even with facial expressions in terms of if someone is crying or sad or emotional in the out group, it doesn't register the same way. It doesn't affect the people in the in group in a way to where they see it like, oh no, like they don't see it as their own pain. But if it's someone from their group, they do. So mirror neurons don't activate with the people in the in group for people in the out group. But for people in the out group, there's actually an over empathy. And what I mean by over empathy is this. The people in the out group, people of color in this case, saw themselves as having way more in common, or having more of a connection, or having more familiarity with the in group than was actually there. So the people in the in group don't have those feelings for them, but the people in the out group have those feelings for them. This creates a huge problem. So I went through study after study after study, and it was the same thing, and they used all different types of scenarios. There were different groups that did the studies, different years, different patients, different subjects, different everything. And it was the same thing with people who were in the out group. They found that people within the out group, people of color, actually had very little empathy for each other. And that the closer the people in their group looked to people in the in group, the more empathy and compassion they have for them. So that was another study. So in this example, if a woman was light complected with Eurocentric features, they found that they saw her as more friendly, they wanted to sit by her, they wanted to help her, they saw her as more hireable and more credible. But the women who had more traditionally black features, they found that she was not accepted, especially if she had thicker hair and braids and things like that. So after looking at study after study after study after study, and I actually went in the perfect mindset, because my mindset going in was on the opposite side, basically hoping to find that the evidence would show that this wasn't true. Hoping that the evidence would show everything, that everything that I said is not the case. And that people are all the same as far as how they see other people in terms of empathy and emotion for the most part. But unfortunately, it wasn't that way. So this is science. These are scientific studies that showed this. And that really sucks. That's actually no fun. So what I learned from this. So I spent probably after I graduated, I spent about 3 months straight just researching history. And look, I could not get out of school mode. Once I graduated, I have 5 degrees. Once I graduated though, for the big one, the big degree, I shouldn't call it that. But once I graduated, I was in that mode. It's probably the same way for athletes. Like if you've been working out and training and getting ready for a big competition or something like that, and you finally have that moment, that time off, that break, you're still going through your routine and working out and stuff, just as if you're getting prepared for the event. I was kind of the same way. So after school, before starting employment, I had some time, and what I found was, sadly, I started doing a ton of historical study, and I'll share that with you in the future. It was even worse. It was even worse. So, fortunately, because I'm an alumni, I still have access to academic libraries. I kept looking stuff up and getting different journals and getting different papers and getting old historic documents. And what I can say is I agree with the anthropologist perspective on race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity is an expression of genes. It's your phenotype. It's the expression of who your parents were and your great-great-great-great-greats, etc. So the color, the pigment doesn't really matter that much. The features, they don't matter that much. It's an expression of your genes. But unfortunately, because of conditioning, epigenetics, and more, a lot of people don't go that way. Even though they might say they do, they actually. And that creates a very perplexing situation for all of us.